Hello, students, and welcome to the fifth module. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're watching this. Just keep some kind of consistency in here, right? I could deviate a deviance class. That would make more sense. But we are going to hop into the idea of structured deviance. So let's just jump into it, shall we? All right, for you is a line. Figure it out. No, I'm just kidding. So let's get going here. In this lecture, we will look at how deviance is organized and how it is structured so that you can connect these ideas to the articles this week. Let's first look at how deviance is organized. How do deviants organize their lives, right? They're deviant. Well, do they keep to themselves or do they belong into groups of other deviants? Joel Best and David Luckenbill outline 5 types of organized deviance on a continuum ranging from the least organized to the heavily organized with loners, colleagues, peers, mobs, or crews, and formalized organizations. Now, loners are the least sophisticated, while formal organizations are the most sophisticated. Loners tend to have very limited contact interacting with other people and are more or mostly confined to themselves and keep their deviance secret from others. Some deviant loners are now able to anonymously communicate with others online who also deviate, but without being labeled as such in the real quote-unquote world, right? Loners may be pedophiles, serial killers, self-injurers. Now, serial killers is an interesting one. We'll get back to that. But self-injurers, a person suffering from anorexia and the like, or bulimia. While someone keeps their deviance to themselves and are secretive about their condition or behavior, those people generally go at it alone, right? Within the name. So we look at this idea on the slide, right? Secretive. No one in the real world knows what they do, can be anonymous online. Cool. So let's get to a little bit more sophisticated versions here, right? Now, the next step here is 2, colleagues. Colleagues are the next on the list of organizations after loners, right? They are slightly more organized as they do have associates with others like themselves, but they don't need to cooperate with them to be deviant. Examples may be prostitutes, right? Who don't inform on each other and or work in similar areas, or others who only associate with each other but don't each know each other, right, that well. The important distinction here is that they know of each other's deviance and won't inform on each other. Snitches get stitches, right? Peers engage in deviance with others like themselves and friends who all do the same deviant acts and run in the same circles as peers. So a group of illicit drug users would fit this category, as well as homeless living together. When looking at a shelter or a tent village, which have been increasingly a major social issue here in the Phoenix area. We can see these homeless individuals in a pop-up communities of individuals without homes and would be assumed that they are peers because they are together in these deviant circles / locations with others in similar situations and status. Now, that makes sense, right? We have these ideas of being together, but we also have to take to the next level, which is third level, which is the idea of mobs or organizations, right? So this conversation around this issue, when we're looking at peers and then transitioning into these structures, is that mobs or crews work together on a team to organize deviant behavior, organized crime. You've heard of the term before. They may have a leader who helps to organize the rules and activities, but they don't belong to a larger organization. So if we think of teams of pickpocketers or burglars would be a good fit for this category. If you've ever traveled to international places, Paris is a big example of this. The way they pickpocket is done in a systematic and organized method. They will work entire areas like a smooth operating system of checks, theft, and routine. Now, the largest, most specialized organization is the Deviant Formal Organization, or the Formal Deviant Organization, FDO, right? So when we go down to this path, we start looking at even more understanding of this. The largest, most specialized one is this, and they can be represented by things such as the mob, or more specialized and complex can even exist if the leader is removed because it is originally more sophisticated manner. Now, if you want an example that you can think of recognized gangs such as the GD or the Gang Disciples that originated in my home state of Illinois, more specifically Chicago, and even more specifically, they originated in the area of Howard and Clark, which is the bridge between Chicago, the city, and a small mini city known as Evanston, Illinois. This example holds up well because the leader, Larry Hoover, has been in federal lockdown for most of his life, but is still able to be seen as the OG or the original gangster, right? And the founder of the GD. If you think of the cartel and how they organize crimes and drug dealers from places such as Mexico, but the operations are here in the US, and you can see the sophistication and depth of this organization. This is also true with the GD and Larry Hoover, who have run things, the entire gang, from federal prison to this day. So as this example here shows, you can look to the street gangs, crime families, smuggling rings, etc. And Larry Hoover is an example of a leader of a formal deviant organization, FDO. You can also think of El Chapo, king of the Mexican cartel, as a leader of an FDO. It is important to recognize that the non-deviant organizations can and do commit crimes at the organizational level. So let's get to this next slide here, right? Which is known as white-collar crime. The organization itself is not set up for deviant purposes, but deviance may play out, usually at the top level, to support the organization or the individuals. If you watch the TV show Ozarks, which is great, and you should watch it on Netflix, think of when, towards the end of the show, Marty decides to work with this powerful pharma company that has deep ties historically with both legal sales of drugs and narcotics, and is shown in the dynamic of both legal/deviant functionality. You can also see examples of this with Enron, Bernie Madoff, with the Ponzi schemes, and the like. While deviance can be organized within different levels of interaction and relationships, the actual deviant act can also be structured in different ways. So let's look at how deviant acts are committed, either by individuals or through cooperation or through conflict. That's a big deal, or through conflict, right? So there's this idea of that deviance can be done on this perspective, right? Deviance can be done individually only. The person does not need the presence of another group or person to commit the act. This may work in tandem with the deviance organizations by a loner, but it can also work in the categorization or categories of organizations. So the organization's continuum doesn't necessarily relate to how deviance is structured. For instance, peers, two or more people, such as drug dealers using many structures their acts individually. They do not rely on each other to do the drugs, so the structure of the deviant act would be individual. This could be argued differently depending on the situation, of course, but a person who relies on another to help take the drugs would be structured as a cooperation with another. I think if we think generally about friends taking turns doing drugs such as snorting cocaine or smoking methamphetamine, we would say that they are likely peers who structure their deviant acts individually. Loners could have victims with their deviant acts. A serial killer, as I said, pull back, draw back, may be a loner, but needs others as victims for their deviant acts to occur. So this does not fit as an individual structure, but rather one in conflict because there is a victim. Child pornographers similarly do their acts as loners, yet there are victims, so the structure would be in conflict. The situation can also be peers, colleagues, and formal deviant organizations when you think of child porn rings. That structure to those who the deviant the FDO, and how many times act will be carried out as loners of but the sharing structure and organization, we can all go all the way to the point of sophistication structure of it, which is looking at the FDO, formal deviant organizations, right? So the important distinction here is that the organization structure are separate from each other. They are two different concepts and are related, distinct from each other. So if deviant acts involve at least two or more people, it can either be done through cooperation or conflict, as I was alluding to on this regard. So we had this idea, right? We tie this ability, individual, right? The act is committed without any help or harm to others. Individual structure doesn't necessarily equal the longer organizational category, right? Cooperation involves two or more people working together to fulfill the deviant acts. So when we go away from this individual, we go over to the two or more people, right? So here we are on the slide. I'll put myself in the middle to commit the act. Okay, cool. So cooperation involves that. Prostitution, which can be debatable whether it's cooperative or in conflict, drug dealing and buying, sadomasochism, and or other sexual deviant acts where there are two partners involved is done cooperation or cooperatively, right? The two or more people reciprocating acts of exchange, goods or services are not framed as victims of one another. It's framing that is one is victim and the other is the perpetrator, right? We would classify the structure as conflicted. Conflict is then simply when there are at least two people, but there is one or more perpetrators and one or more victims that is an unwilling participant. Thus, you see that the complications of prostitution and the idea exists unwilling victims and the hard conversations of necessity or desperation, the idea of wanted engagement. Sexual assault, sexual trafficking, and abuse would fit into this deviant structure as well. there can be a strong connection between how deviance is socially organized and how the acts play out. It is important for us as we examine the articles this week to understand the concepts that analyze how deviance behaviors can be structured differently. For instance, some sexual deviance topics take more cooperation structure of deviance, such as strip clubs and patrons and dancers, whereas others, especially sexual violence, fits with conflicts between two or more people involved. While reading this week, think about how the examples of deviance are organized and how they are structured, which deviant acts are performed in cooperation and which are conflicted with at least one victim involved. So, as you're thinking through, think of these things. How is it performed? How is it structured? I hope this helps you delve or dive a little deeper and develop a deeper analysis of social deviance in your readings this week. I will see you in the next lecture.